Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So that was a traditional invitation done wonderfully by Rahul for us to give a talk. And the thing I chanted was a traditional homage to the triple gem of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, which is our way of remembering what all this is for before we begin. There's a quote I heard recently that if you want to put men out to sea, you don't teach them to mill the wood and create the rigging and set the sail. You teach them to love the ocean. And in some ways, every motion, every ritual we do here, all the props, are for the sake of remembering in the midst of this dry land and the day-to-day world of what someone here has called mundania. We remember the ocean and what all this is for. Because if the life that we live is only for the sake of pleasant experience, of relationship, which is good enough, of the American dream, then in a sense, all this is, it's not enough. It's not worthy of our deaths. It's not worthy of our lives. It's not worthy of the deeper hunger that people have for the ocean. And so we come together once a week to remember why we're here. That the truest sense of the homeless life isn't necessarily taking robes, but the ceasing of looking to the world as an object and a source of feeding, and rather to use it as a tool to grow and to give, and a recipient of blessings. And something in us wants this. I spoke recently with a monk who was talking about his first encounter with Buddhism, and he was said he was really into partying and went back home and was sort of browsing through YouTube, and he remembered hearing something about a monk named Siddhartha who had not seen birth, aging, and death for the first years of his life, and then suddenly had encountered them and had changed his whole trajectory. So he Googled Buddhism, and the first line he read on Wikipedia was, "Craving is the source and cause of suffering." And he said that was the most, he'd never heard it put so clearly. And the next picture he saw was a monk meditating on a mountain, at which point he walked out of his room and told his mom, "I'm going to be a monk." And I don't know how she took that, but he's a monk now, so. And in a sense, we have the metric all wrong, because if this existence is just for our own happiness, for some measure of comfort, then it's not enough. Because what we need is also a duty, a gift and a mission that we give to the world, and a purpose. And when one has encountered the Dhamma, we can speak about it in terms of, secular terms. It lowers our blood pressure. Research is very clear that it improves happiness set points, 20 minutes a day for about 8 weeks. But in some sense, that misses the point. I went to a sermon recently at Fauntleroy Church, and the Reverend there was speaking. Her name's Leah. And she was speaking about how, what'd she say? Normal is not resurrection. In the sense that through all this difficult period of political upheaval and COVID, we can feel as if it's a barrier to what our lives should be. But her point, I think, was that in that brokenness is our potential to find something real. And I know how this went for me, in that when life is a perfect, seemingly uncracked, unmarred surface, it's as if you're touching porcelain and there's no crack or wound to really touch something deeper and to come into contact with compassion and the heart of the world, the difficulty and deeper sense of purpose and joy that binds us as humans. So I think for me, the point I took from that sermon was not just that normal is not resurrection, but that there is no normal. There's only death or resurrection every moment, every day. And the Buddha said as much in the sense of the Dhammapada verse, where he says that those without mindfulness, those who are heedless, are as if dead already. Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. And we don't have to think of this as any great ontological claim. What we can remember is that as we grow older, what we call sankhara in Buddhism, these programs we run day after day, these habit patterns of personality, habit, the extrovert, the introvert, the wounded, whatever particular orientation we adopt towards ourselves, the world, they crust over one on top of the other until a few decades in, you find yourself living life through a plane of plexiglass, and you can hardly touch that poignancy which once was there. And this is no small tragedy, though it is harder to perceive in modern suburbia. We don't realize how sick we are, in the sense that there was a shanty of Burmese illegal immigrants in Thailand near the monastery I was at. And not to glorify poverty at all. They had hard lives. But they were a lot happier than a lot of people I know. They had community, they had faith, they had a brightness to their day. And so many of us exist in isolated silos, the frozen people. And more than that, we feel that the lives we're living, the purpose we intuit for ourselves, has disappeared little by little to some extent, or maybe we're just a little bit off in a confluence of comfort and convenience. And it might only be a slight niggling doubt that we're not quite living the life that's worthy of what we know we're capable of. But this is what the Buddha's great gift to us was. Here's the ocean. Here's how you point your compass needle every day. What is the first thing you do before you wake up and the last thing you do before you go to bed? And if you have a shrine, an image, doesn't have to be of the Buddha. If there's some other image that inspires you and makes you remember why you're here, then the first thing you can do is bow to it, and the last thing you do is bow to it. And dedicate your life, the goodness of your day, to those you love, to those in need, to the world. There's the story of several disciples of the Buddha who every night they would fall asleep with their heads pointing towards the direction they thought the Buddha was in. I don't know how you would embody that today, especially if you live with someone and sleep in the same bed as them, but having a shrine, having something in the house is good. Some way of remembering. Because our great conceit is that we're beyond this language, this superstition, quote unquote, and yet we all worship something. We all bow to something. So here, now, today, we make it explicit. What are we bowing to? What do we point our lives towards, and what is our Polaris, our North Star? These images they're just images, they're statues, but can we remember what that image means? Compassion, an awakened heart, an utter selflessness, the aspiration that we might move towards a purity of heart and purpose that lets us dedicate our whole lives and beings towards a transcendent goal, a kindness beyond conditions, immutable, unshakable. And that's what we're capable of. I know for me, as a layperson, I was so hungry to meet someone or anyone who had something different about them. I knew lots of happy, fairly well-adjusted people. And then I saw a video of Ajahn on YouTube. And many of you have seen this probably. It's the interview with him in England. And in the words of Paul Breider, he looked like a frog, very content on his lily pad. And Paul Breider said, I would do anything to be like that frog on the lily pad. And you can just tell in every second of that 5-minute video that there is something utterly different about this man. And then you travel to Thailand and you meet saints that are still living. You meet men and women who have achieved something that you did not think was still possible. You meet monks, nuns, Longpo Pasano, Ajahn Santusika, Ayya Santusika, who have a stability and a trustworthiness about them, which is hard to completely comprehend, and which, if it's encountered appropriately, should shake us and change our trajectory. Because what it means for each of us, and what this image of the Buddha means, what his example meant, is that each of us is capable of complete awakening, of a complete dissolution of greed, hatred, and delusion. And what you see when you meet beings like that is amazing. I had a monk friend, Ajahn Kovilo and I both knew him, named, I won't say his name right now, but he was an assistant to one of the current abbot of Wat Pah in Thailand, Longpo Liam. And Longpo Liam, you see what this well-practiced mind can achieve. So Longpo Liam would get up at 3 a.m. with the morning chanting, which is every day there at Wat Pah, meditate, chant with the monks, receive and teach lay people as they came to the monastery in the morning. Then he'd pour cement for most of the day. I think there's a story of one layperson who came with a bunch of trees to get planted, and they saw this sort of monk wandering around and sort of called him over to help put the trees in proper places, not to actually dig, we're not allowed to do that, but to sort of place the trees where they would be. And after they'd been doing this for like 2 hours, someone came along and realized, like he just noticed all these monks began helping out alongside this one monk, and was kind of confused why everyone was coming together randomly, until he realized it was the abbot of the leader of about 350 monasteries worldwide. And so Longpo Liam would work, pour cement all day, give Dhamma teachings late into the night. Sometimes Longpo Cha would teach sort of a 5-hour Dhamma talk just to make people really, really push themselves. And then the assistant, Longpo Liam, would pretend to retire to his little tent. He sort of slept in one to set a good example, so that his assistant could go get some rest. But then Longpo Liam would get up again and go off, and people would find him fixing pipes in the middle of the night. So the pure heart that's utterly selfless, this is not a selfish path. People always ask when you come out of retreat how it feels to come back to the real world. And this is the great conceit, that we think we live in the real world, when in fact much of what we live on and in is a hall of mirrors, projections. And those moments of clarity, of poignancy, of beauty, of real giving only occur when we have the careful restraint to pull back, to center, to let the mind rest, and achieve a happiness and inner wealth, which then allows us to move back into the world and not feed off the relationship, off the career, off the experience, but give. And it's all good to say, but unless you have that daily discipline to sit in silence for at least 20 minutes, that's basic hygiene for us practitioners, then it can be very difficult. So this is the Buddha's gift to us, is helping us remember the ocean. This is our gift to each other. To realize we have a responsibility as practitioners to embody this path as well as we can. And that's the biggest gift we can give those we love. Because our friends don't need another person to go out with, to go on a coffee date with, to go see a new movie with. What will make a difference to them is having one person, at least in their life, who's had the clarity of mind and the steadfastness of heart to take a concrete step towards something beyond. Because then when they have the divorce or the cancer comes or something else, then there's someone they know who's begun along that path. And that's a gift worthy of this life. So most of that we could get from Mary Oliver or Rumi, in the sense of talking about an ethic of love, of giving. Of course, no one has articulated it, in my opinion, as beautifully as the Buddha in this dispensation. But perhaps the Buddha's greatest gift to us was actually teaching us how to mill the wood, how to hoist the rigging, how to build the ship and get it off the beach. Because the practicalities of how we clean the heart are essential, and it's what actually will move us along this path. You know, there's the story of the first person the Buddha encounters as he's walking away from Bodh Gaya towards Benares, which is one other example of his wisdom and compassion, the fact that after awakening he wanted to teach someone and realized that his 5 former companions were in Benares about 150 miles away, so he just decided to start walking. And On the road, he meets a man named Upaka. And Upaka notices the sort of brightness in the Buddha's face and says, "Who is your teacher?" And the Buddha utters verses and finishes by saying something along the lines of, "I have no teacher. I'm here to beat the drum of the deathless in a world gone blind." And Upaka says, "Good luck with that," furrows his brow and walks off a side road. So I think you can imagine the Buddha after that walking those 150 miles, thinking, how do you actually teach this? How do you speak about this path in a way people can understand and practice? And by the time those days of walking down the dusty Ganges Valley had finished, he had the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the first discourse on the setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma, which encompasses the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Middle Way, and which Bhikkhu Bodhi has referred to as the most profound utterance in humanity's history. I think that's true. And if you're going to memorize one chant, that's a good one to aim for. So, one of the most detailed paths, detailed modes of exposition the Buddha gave us in his 45 years of teaching, during which he left us 22,000 pages worth of teachings. Because every day that's what he did. He found someone who might listen and he tried to speak to them. Is the Anapanasati Sutta, the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. And it's 16 steps, which we do not have time to go through right now. But the essence is we climb a ladder of increasingly refined perceptions anchored constantly in the breath. And in doing so, the mind achieves a state of what we call samadhi, unification, a lucid brightness. And only with that lucid brightness and strength can the heart see clearly.